So we are looking tonight at Parasha's Terumah. If you've got the Art Scroll Stone Chumash, you can find it on page 444. In any other Chumash that you may have, it's chapter 25 in Shmos. This is the first Parasha from the beginning of the Torah until now, which is fairly technical in nature. Even last week's Parasha, there was quite a lot of narrative material, and of course a whole array of fascinating and very relevant mitzvot. This week's parsha describes, as I'm sure you know, the construction of the Mishkan and its the materials that were needed for it, and the technical details are presented in full. I'd like to look at the opening passage in the parsha. So again, Paragraph H, chapter 25 from the beginning. V'ader Hashem al Moshe lemar, daber el bnei Yisrael v'yikchu li terumah. Speak to the children of Israel, and the implication is, and tell them, v'yikchu li terumah, they shall take from me a donation. Me'ez kol ish asher yidvenu libo, from on the part of every person whose heart motivates him. Tikchu es terumasi, you shall take my donation. Now, the irony here is not lost on any close reader of the text. It should say, Vayitenu li terumah. The emphasis we would have thought would be on the giving. The instruction is the Jewish people shall give, shall donate, shall contribute. And it says, Asher yidvenu libo, these are not mandatory, although we'll see there may be a certain, not tonight, but there may be the machzis hashekel, probably was a poll tax that was obligatory, but essentially here the Torah is emphasizing here the voluntary nature, the one who is of generous spirit, the one who is of generous disposition, the one who is charitably motivated, he shall give in accordance with his motivation and in accordance with his means, naturally. If it's all about giving, why does the Torah say vayikchu li? Now, the simple answer would be that for whatever the reason, Moshe is instructing the officiants, those who are representing the people, maybe each tribe or each sub-tribe or each collection of each neighborhood within the encampment of the Jewish people, they would designate, or maybe people would volunteer to be the fundraisers or the collectors, the gabayim, to go from tent to tent and to accept donations. That's the simple understanding by Chuli Terumah, that they shall take from every donor, they shall take, and the Torah goes on to describe what they need. It says, this is what you shall take. Take gold, take silver, take copper, take turquoise, purple, scarlet wool, etc. But still, the word vayikchu is odd, because why is it that the Torah here is addressing the collectors? Why not address the donors? Why not emphasize the act of giving? So many Mefarshim speak about this. Ha-Kabbalah has a very nice idea, and he says the following. Of course, in order to contribute, to donate, to give, to perform an act of charity, one needs the recipient and the giver. Now, most of the time, the giver is either acting out of generosity, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of coercion, can be a whole range of motivations. He's giving. The recipient usually is delighted to receive, and the recipient recognizes his role as the beneficiary of the largesse, of the beneficence of the giver. This is the nature of charitable work. And as someone who has been involved in fundraising for a long time, I can certainly attest to the satisfaction and the feeling of, validation that one can receive when receiving a donation. Okay, what about the giver? So I said there can be a range of emotions. Is it possible that the giver feels as if it is a privilege to give? Is it possible for the giver to feel that when I give, I receive, and it is more of a pleasure, it is more of an honor, it is more of a privilege to give than it is even to receive? Is it possible that the giver feels as if he is actually receiving more than he gives? Of course, the answer is yes. not only in the sort of conceptual sense that a person who feels that he's doing a mitzvah and he realizes that he is grateful to Hashem that he is in a position to give. That certainly is true. But sometimes, even in an interpersonal sense, the person who gives is so delighted with the fact that he's able to give and that the recipient is pleased to receive his gift, that the giver feels as if he's receiving. That's what ha-Kabbalah says here. Terumah, that the people who give, these donors, these people who are of charitable disposition, who are whose heart motivates him to give, they were so grateful for the opportunity to give that they felt that they were receiving. That's why the Torah expresses the act of giving with the word vaychuli. And we find this idea even in a halachic vein. The Mishnah, the Gemara in Kiddushin says, nasnahi, if the prospective bride gives a gift, an object of value to the groom, Nasnahi v'amar lo, and he said to her, behold, you are betrothed to me with the fact that I'm receiving this gift from you. Normally, the groom gives a gift, especially a ring. And he says to the bride, and when she receives it, because she's received the ring, so she becomes betrothed, because that is the sort of established formula. But says the Talmud, it's possible that in the case of an Adam Chashuv, a man of high distinction, maybe he's an aristocrat, maybe he's a great scholar, maybe he's highly praised, highly regarded, and to the point that the fact that he is willing to receive and to take a gift from her, she feels not only grateful, but she feels as if she's receiving. And the halacha is mekudeshes, if he's an Adam Chashuv. So if she gives and he makes the declaration, then she's mekudeshes. Interestingly, one time not that long ago, Ruthie and I were guests in the home of some friends of ours who live locally. And after we had the Shabbos meal, he said to me that I'm so appreciative. We so much enjoyed your visit. We're so honored with your visit that, if this were a Kiddushin situation, he said it would be Mekudeshes, meaning the benefit that he's received from hosting us would be something that he would consider that a valuable acquisition, so to speak. And he was referring exactly to this Gemara. But ha-Kabbalah adds something further as well, which is very beautiful. He says, we find a couple of other cases in Bereshis where the Torah says lose a lashon lekicha, an expression of taking, when really it is talking about giving. In the case of Avraham Avinu, when he welcomed the guests, who were, of course, angels, which he may or may not have realized they were angels, not exactly clear to what extent he realized who they really were, at least at first. Maybe he did realize from the start. But in any case, it says, Va'ikcha pas lechem, I shall take a morsel of bread. Now, what he means is, I'll give you a morsel of bread. It says, ha-Kabbalah, Va'ikcha pas lechem, because for Avraham, waiting on his guests, especially if he knew they were angels, but maybe even if he thought they were just passing Bedouins. For him, he was so of such charitable disposition. He was such a chesed. He was such an ish chesed, the embodiment of chesed, that when he was talking about giving, he said, I'm going to receive the pleasure, I'm going to receive the hana of providing hospitality for these passing visitors. And he mentions another case as well. It says, Vayikach ish nezem zahav ushnei semidim al yadeha. The man took a golden nezem, is actually probably a nose ring, and also a bracelets al yadeha. It says Vayikach, he took. Who is it talking about? I'm sure you could all tell me, but your microphones are off. I'm sure you could tell me. It's Eliezer, Eved Avraham, who gave to Rivka. Again, he regarded himself as like the beneficiary of the opportunity to give these gifts on behalf of Abraham, to betroth thereby Yitzchak, and all of that to Rivka. So there are those are two other examples where the Torah uses the expression vayikach, when really we would have thought the point is the giving, not the taking. Says ha-Kabbalah, the reason is because sometimes when you give, you receive. This is the privilege of giving. Okay, so much for the first passage. Again, many Meforshim speak about that. But I want to share with you tonight an observation, which I know I say it so frequently, with a moment's thought, it's so obvious. The question, at least, the analysis we'll see is brilliant, but at least the question we should all have taken note of, I can't exactly say that I did, even though I have studied some of the Meforshim who deal with it. I'm talking about just probably turn one page, depending on what Chumash you're using. And we're looking here now a little bit further on in this chapter, when the Torah begins to describe the features of this Mishkan of the tabernacle. Va'asu aron atzei shitim, so it's pasuk Yud, and they shall make an ark of acacia wood. And the Torah gives the dimensions, and it says it should be overlaid with gold within and without. In fact, as we'll see, it will be relevant in a few minutes, the Torah, the Talmud describes how it wasn't simply overlaid with gold, like plated, but actually there were three separate boxes. There was an ark that was made of wood. There was an ark that was made of gold, into which the wooden ark fit precisely, and there was another ark made of gold, which fit inside. So actually we have three boxes that fit one inside the other, like those Russian dolls, lahavdil. So we'll see the relevance of that in a short while. So the Torah describes the material, the dimensions, and then the Torah says in Pasuk Yud Beis, verse 12, "V'yatzakta lo arba taba'os zahav," and you shall cast for this ark, in order to transport it, 4 rings, 4 golden rings. Now, the reason we need the rings is in order to put staves, the badim. A stave is like a stick, a stave that would be placed in the rings. Now, look closely. V'yatzakta lo arba tabos zahav v'nasata al arba pa'amosav, and you shall place those 4 golden rings. You shall, not a ring that a person wears, but it's a ring that serves a pragmatic function. It would be it was made of gold, but it has to be large enough for these staves to go through. And that's how the staves would be effectively linked or attached to the ark, so that the Levium could carry it, because it was necessary for this whole structure to be portable, to be possible to construct, dismantle, transport, and to build again. And so the ark and the other features needed also to be transportable. But the Torah says, "V'nasat al arba pa'amosav," and to put it, ArtScroll renders it on the 4 corners. 2 rings on each corner. Okay, so these are the 4 corners of the ark. If you've got the ArtScroll, maybe you have another text that has an illustration as well, but in the ArtScroll on page 447, take a look at that illustration there. And even if you don't have this one, you can imagine in your own mind. You see there the ark, you see the rings that are attached to the, just pull it up here. You can see, no, you can't see. No, I've got it too blurry. I'm sorry. No, it doesn't quite work. Sorry about that. Anyway, the rings go on the corners. The question is, what kind of word is this, pa'amosav? Now, from the context, it is clear that it means corners. If you take a look at Onkelos, the Aramaic translation, it says, Vatitein al arba zaviyaseh. The word zavit is a corner. So in the 4 corners, if you look now at Rashi, if you have Rashi's commentary there, so Rashi says, quoting Onkelos, find it, Pa'amosav ketargumu zaviyaseh, as the translation, as the Aramaic translation renders it, those rings were placed towards the upper part of the ark. Near the kaporos is the cover of the ark. Shtay mikan, 2 on each side. L'rachbo shel aron, according to the width of the ark. V'habadim nesunim bahem, and the staves were placed in these two sets of rings. Va'arko shalaron mafsik ben habadim amasai mechetzi ben bad levad. And the width of the ark would separate between the two staves. Shiyu shnei bnei adam hanosim es ha'aron mahalchim beineim. So the two men who were holding the ark in the back and two in the front would stand between them. So if you take a look at the image, you can see how it's 2.5, we don't see exactly the size, but it was 2.5 amot, and amah is about half a meter. So 2.5 amot is enough space for two men to stand within between the two staves. Okay, so much for the technicalities of it. What is the significance and what is the meaning of that word pa'amosav? So we saw that Rashi renders it like Targum, corners. It says Ibn Ezra that he says, I've reviewed the entirety of the Hebrew scriptures in all of the Mikra, in all of the Tanakh, and we never find that the word pa'am in the singular means a corner. Pa'am doesn't mean a corner. Pa'am means a regel, like it says, Mayafu pa'amayich. It says in Shir HaShirim, how beautiful are your steps. Pa'amayich, it says, means a regel, it means a foot, not a corner. He says, therefore, according to Ibn Ezra, what the Torah says is that there were legs, that the Aron, not like it's here you see on the bottom, it's completely flat, but rather there were legs, like you might have a chest of drawers or another furniture, which generally has legs, so you can clean underneath it, or for whatever the reason, maybe it's just decorative, but it has legs. So it says Ibn Ezra, there were legs, probably just minimal legs, and the tabaos, the rings went in those legs. Maybe it was the intention of the Torah, the rings should not be attached to the ark itself, and therefore the rings were attached to the legs that were on the four corners of the ark. That's what Ibn Ezra suggests. Says Ramban, in critiquing Ibn Ezra, as he very frequently does, you've got it all wrong. I mean, you've got it partly wrong. Pa'amayich, your steps. Ma'ifu pa'amayich doesn't mean your legs or your feet. It means your steps. He says, we find that the word refers to pesi'ah, like we find in the Talmud, someone said about a certain girl, "Kama naot psiotea shal rivazu." How beautiful are the steps of this girl? He was criticized for it. He shouldn't have been watching, but he was. The point is that even in Shir HaShirim, when it speaks about how beautiful are your steps, doesn't mean your feet. It means that her way of walking may be in an appealing way. I don't want to say in a seductive way, but perhaps so. That is the meaning. Pa'amayich, it refers to the steps, taking steps, not to the leg itself or the foot. Says Ramban, therefore the intention is that the rings were put at the bottom of the ark, and like where the legs would have been, so that when the men are carrying it, so the word pa'amosav alludes to the steps that the people are taking. So, but Ramban also agrees to Ibn Ezra that it doesn't mean pa'amosav does not mean corners, because we don't find it has that meaning anywhere in the Torah. But the Tur critiques Ramban and Ibn Ezra both, because according to both of those opinions, the rings were not where you see it in this illustration near the top, but they were at the very bottom. And the Talmud itself says that was not the case. The Talmud says that the staves were positioned towards the upper part, like the upper third, the way it's depicted again here in the art scroll. And the reason for that is not difficult to figure out why it should be, because the center of gravity, if you hold imagine yourself holding something heavy, even if you are joined by a few other people holding it together, and you're holding the staves from the bottom. If you're holding something which is heavy, it's going to sway back and forth terribly. The way you need to hold it is towards the upper part, like in this illustration, and then the ark will be suspended mostly underneath. It won't sway back and forth in that manner. So, and that's what the Gemara says as well. And therefore, the Tur is certain that Ramban and Ibn Ezra are both mistaken. The Gemara says, "Shlish ha'elyon samach lekaporos ha-Ketav." These rings were near the top. And by the way, especially this ark, because the upper part of the ark, the kaporos, the cover, was thick, and you've got the images of those keruvim, of those angelic figures as well, which were higher up above further. So if you hold this ark only from the bottom, it's going to sway terribly and maybe uncontrollably, unless there was a miraculous intervention, which perhaps was the case. But in accordance with the furniture design, I once had a student who had a degree in furniture design, actually. But I'm sure that he would agree that the way that it's illustrated, and the way that Rashi says, the way that Talmud says, is the sensible, the logical way, and the other approach that we've seen just doesn't quite work. The problem is that the criticism of Onkelos, that we don't find that the word pa'amotav means its corners. We don't find the word pam meaning corners anywhere in all Tanakh, and the word pam appears many times, if you excuse the pun, pa'amim rabot, and yet it never means corners. So what is the explanation here? Ve-ha-Kabbalah, as he does, comes to our aid, and he explains that actually this explanation of Onkelos is not bizarre at all, because he says the real meaning of the word pa'am, as we've said, it means footsteps. It implies motion. A foot and a footstep are completely different concepts. A foot is an anatomical feature. A footstep is meaningful only because it expresses walking, progressing, moving, motion. He says that when a person turns, if a person is walking and then he turns, so in order to turn a corner, you need to the motion is emphasized when you turn. When you turn a corner, if you stand still, you can't turn. Turning can only be accomplished with motion. So the word pa'am, which means like I said, footsteps, it also suggests turning, like even the word pina, which means a corner. So pinia is to turn. Pina is a corner, but the word pina is related to the word pinia, to turn. In other words, the action, the motion, and therefore the word pa'am, meaning footstep, also implies motion. And therefore it's related to the word turning, because when you turn a corner, you've got to move. The word pa'amon, which is probably the word that we're most familiar with in terms of the word pa'am as a description of an object, it means, pa'amon means a bell. A bell can only function with motion. If a bell is still, then it doesn't accomplish its purpose in life. Its purpose in life is to tinkle. So either you swing the bell, and if it's a very heavy bell, that's how they do it. The bell actually swings, and the clapper within, clings. Or if it's small, then you can just shake the bell, and of course the inval within makes a noise. But the point is, pa'amon involves motion. It only functions when there's motion. So he says the suggestion of Onkelos actually, in addition to the fact that from the context it is evident it means on the corners, but the association with pa'am, meaning footsteps, and the corner, he says, is not such a stretch after all. But then he says we have to explain, why does the Torah use that unusual word pa'am, which really means footsteps? Why not use a word like pina or mikzoa? There are other words in the Torah which are unambiguous and they mean corner. We find them many places in the Torah. Why use that word pa'am, which has the remez, the hint to the steps, to the footsteps? So he says a very beautiful idea. Who carried this ark when it was in its peregrinations during all the years in the desert? And even though they didn't know, perhaps at that time, they were going to wander for years, but they still had to take it to the land of Israel, and they had to travel with it. So, of course, the answer is the Leviim. We know that. In particular, it was the sub-tribe of Kahas. They were the most privileged and probably the most exalted sub-tribe within the tribe of Levi. It was Bnei Kahas. In their respect for the Aron, and the Rambam says this explicitly, they would not stand like, again, if you have the access to that illustration, behind it carrying, and the people in front stand facing front and they carry it, and they walk in that way. That wasn't how they did it. Because in such an arrangement, the men behind are facing the front, but the men in front, their backs are to the ark. I don't know if you're aware that even in a shul, it's not right to sit with one's back to the Aron Kodesh. Or when the Sefer Torah is out, we don't sit with our backs to the Sefer Torah. Even if you look closely, you may see that when the man is, for example, reading the Haftarah, and the Torah has been lifted, and someone is often sitting with the Sefer Torah, or in some places maybe it's, has a certain place where it's rest. But the point is, the one who says the Haftarah should not stand in such a way that his back is to the Sefer Torah. This is out of respect for the Sefer Torah, and the Aron was not less a symbol of the divine presence than the Sefer Torah in your shul or kesher or wherever it may be. And therefore, that was the halacha. I don't know if it was absolute halacha, but that's what the Rambam says. They would stand sideways. They would stand in such a way that they would face one another, and they would face the ark, and they would have to walk sideways. So that's why, says ha-Kabbalah, maybe that's why the Torah uses the word pa'amotav in order to hint to the unique manner of the footsteps of those who would carry the Aron. Now, you may be thinking about the famous Gemara in Sota, which says, Aron nose es nosav, that the ark carries those who carry it. And this is a beautiful image that the ark, although if you reckon how much it weighed, it would be very heavy indeed. But according to our tradition, actually the ark, it was like it levitated to the point that those who held on to it were carried aloft by the ark. They didn't have to carry it at all. If that's the case, and ha-Kabbalah mentions that as well, he says maybe the Torah says Pesiotav, its corner, Pa'amosav, its corners, meaning and alluding to the steps, because it's almost as if the ark had its own legs. The ark walked on its own. It hints to this idea, even though it didn't have legs. I mean, according to this vision, that it carried itself, it would probably levitate like a hovercraft of some sort. But the imagery is, or the sort of remez, the hint is, it's as if it has legs, that it has legs, not like Ibn Ezra says, legs to which the rings are attached, etc. It has legs, and it walks on its own legs, so to speak. Of course, it was carried, but according to this midrashic view, that it carried those who carry it. In fact, it carried itself. So that's why maybe it says pa'amosav, to hint to the steps. It wasn't just legs, it took its own steps. Then he suggests one last idea, and I have my own closing flourish, if you will permit me. He says another idea of the word pa'amosav. Of course, the word pa'amosav is related to the word pa'am achar pa'am, pa'amayim. Pa'amayim means twice. Harbe pa'amim, many times. So he says, if you think about it, this ark was very heavy. He explains the golden box on the outside, the wooden box on the inside, the golden box inside the wooden one, the tablets of the covenant that were there as well, besides the kapores, the covering that was a tefach thick, and the kruvim, the angelic figures above that. It would have been very heavy. He says, okay, maybe they could carry it because they were very strong, but how could the rings sustain the weight of the whole ark if they were just attached to the golden ark on the outside? So he says maybe the rings actually were fastened not only to the golden ark on the outside, but to the wooden ark within it, and maybe even the gold ark within that. So he says that's why it's pa'amosav, hinting to the word harbe pa'amim, like kefel, it was like doubled and tripled. This ring was affixed in such a way that it was attached to the ark in its entirety, in its entire thickness as well. But I'd like to end with a thought of my own based on what ha-Kabbalah has told us. This idea about the ark that would carry itself. To me, this is such a compelling image for the last 3,000 years, most of which we've been in exile, the Jewish people. And you know, the Torah has accompanied us in exile. The ark is portable because it is the essential companion, the sustainer of the Jewish people. Just as we have been driven to the corners of the earth, the Torah has come with us. The Torah has accompanied us. The Torah has escorted us. The Torah indeed is our guarantor of our return ultimately to the land of Israel as well. So when it says Pa'amosav, I would like to elaborate a bit further on what ha-Kabbalah says, to say that the Torah has legs, the Torah is durable, the Torah is a manifestation of Hashem himself that is given to the Jewish people. And like it says, Vayhi ben Soa ha'aron, when the Aron would travel, and so it has traveled with the Jewish people in our exile. So maybe this is why it says Pa'amosab. These are not just corners, not just rings, not just staves, but it hints to the idea that the ark symbolizing the Torah itself has legs. It is durable. It is the guarantor, as I say, of our survival, even in our exile in these distant British Isles as well. So to me, this opened my eyes. I had seen that word Pa'amosav. I saw what Rashi says, it means corners. I didn't think too much more of it. But we see now that the question of whether it means corners is disputed by some of the classic Mefarshim. But according to ha-Kabbalah, he validates it and explains why the Torah uses the word Pa'amosav, hinting to not just the corners, but the steps, the portability, the durability, the mobility of the Aron. So with that, we'll conclude. Just we like to sum up as well. So we said by Terumah that the Torah used the expression of taking, because those who gave, they felt as if they were receiving. They felt like I once met the late Zalman Margolis, for those who may know of him. Died quite some years ago. And when I told him about the work that I'm doing, the work that we do at Kesher, he was so inspired. He said, you know, I would like to have the schus of playing a part in that. I would like to have this. He's a very wealthy man, very great philanthropist. He said, I would like to have the schus of also having a role in the work that you do. It's in that spirit that the Torah says, Vaychuli Terumah. Those who gave felt that actually they were receiving. And then we've spoken already at length now about Pa'amosab, so I don't need to review it. Thank you to everyone for joining us. I wish you Shabbat Shalom.